The administration has, over the last 4 years, I think, tried to pursue a relatively balanced policy towards China. During the election campaign a few months ago, Governor Romney, the Republican nominee, was very critical of the administration's trade policy, saying it wasn't being tough enough on trade or the issue of China's exchange rate policy. Romney said on his first day as president, if he won, he would declare China a currency manipulator, managing to keep its exchange rate at quite low levels to promote its exports and its foreign trade. The U.S. Treasury, under Obama, did not call China a currency manipulator for 4 reasons. First, the RMB has, over the last 5 years, appreciated by 30% in nominal terms. And because China's had a higher inflation rate in the U.S., it's gone up by even more in real terms. Secondly, China's current account surplus has fallen from 10% of GDP 5 years ago to only about 2.5% today. And the big concern of the U.S. Treasury a couple of years ago in the G20 global talks on trade policy was to encourage current account deficits to be, or current account surpluses to be less than 4% of GDP. And now the biggest current account surpluses in the world aren't in Asia, they're actually in Germany and Holland, though Singapore and Malaysia also still have quite large current account surpluses. Thirdly, during the global financial crisis 4 years ago, China had by far the most aggressive stimulus program of any country in the world. They announced a $600 billion infrastructure spending program. They increased their money supply and bank loans by 30% in 1 year. This was a hyperactive policy, and it played a major role in leading the global economy out of that recession in 2009. And the U.S. Treasury does give China a lot of points for being so aggressive. And finally, the U.S. needs China's help on other issues. It needs China's help in Iran, trying to impose sanctions, limiting Iran's nuclear program. It needs China's help on North Korea, especially now that we have a new leader in North Korea who's very unknown and very untested. So for all these reasons, the administration has not gone off in a highly aggressive direction, as Governor Romney would have, on China's exchange rate question. But the administration has imposed new trade sanctions on China because of complaints about trade conditions in various microeconomic sectors. We've had new trade sanctions on China in the area of tires, auto parts, and solar power. And the recent sanctions on solar power, I think, are quite interesting because they reflect a perception that China's had in the last 5 years, a deliberate industrial policy to achieve global domination in this market. There's no doubt China has created, in the last 5 or 6 years, the world's leading producers of solar power products. And the problem is they've created so much capacity that prices have collapsed and no one's making any money. We've had bankruptcies in the US and Germany of solar power companies, and the Chinese solar power companies have seen their share prices collapse. They're running large losses. They're now being forced to get financial help from provincial and local governments where their plants are operating. In any case, this is an example of a complaint of a set of obligations about microeconomic policy. And I think we'll see more of that in the future as China becomes a more important player in more sophisticated areas of technology and manufacturing. Indeed, in the last few months, the U.S. Trade Office has increased its number of Mandarin-speaking lawyers from 1 to 6 to address this issue of China's microeconomic policies. Now, we had a situation like this as well 20 years ago with Japan. Japan achieved a dominant position during the 1980s in industries like semiconductors, automobiles, consumer electronics. And there was a feeling then as well that Japan did use various microeconomic policies to achieve global domination. And again, during that period, in total contrast to China, Japan banned foreign direct investment in most of these sectors. Japan never really opened up after World War II to foreign investment the way China's done in the last 20 years. And all of these complaints about Japan led, in the year 1992, to a new process called Structural Impediments Initiative. We had, during the year 1992, huge negotiations on Japan's microeconomic policies. I recall one day back in the summer of 1992 when Japan had in the city of Washington 140 civil servants negotiating on these issues. And the outcome was a series of reports that made various proposals for how Japan could liberalize its own internal market and become more open to foreign imports, to foreign competition. I think if we go out 5 or 10 years, the U.S. will end up having similar negotiations with China, something like the Structural Impediments Initiative to address areas where we do have clear microeconomic tensions. And again, China has been, in the last 20 years, far more open than Japan was back in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s. But there's no doubt that while China's more open, China does have microeconomic policies intent on acquiring global domination in various sectors. And there's no way this will avoid having tensions with the US and also with Europe. Indeed, Europe has announced here in the last few weeks they'll probably have sanctions as well on China's solar power companies.